Friends, today's story is about a film that doesn't just show time travel, but directly enters your mind and raises questions. This movie bends identity, logic, and existence in such a way that you start asking yourself, if I am no longer me, then who am I? The story begins at a radio station where a controversial show is playing, The Rant. The host of this show is James Bunratty, who considers himself a hardcore truth seeker. James believes that mainstream science hides lies, and that truth exists only in conspiracy theories and alternative thinking. His listeners are people who doubt every accepted theory. It is on this show that our main character, Tim Travers, makes his entry. Friends, this is our story's hero, or rather, an anti-hero. Tim is neither a doctor nor a mainstream scientist. When James calls him an alternative scientist, Tim immediately stops him and says that alternative science is for bored housewives with crystals and closet racists. Tim is arrogant, sharp, and socially broken as well. He was expelled from school because of behavioral issues, but the ironic thing is that his grades were always top class. James asked Tim a direct question. What exactly is the time traveler's paradox? Tim explains that it is a thought experiment. Suppose a scientist builds a time machine that goes exactly 1 minute into the past. Now that same scientist goes back and kills his younger self. The question is, if the younger self is dead, how does the future scientist still exist? A person who should not exist is standing right there. That is the paradox. And paradoxes, according to Tim, are impossible. Now the scene shifts to Tim's lab, and this is where the film really starts playing its real game. Friends, Tim didn't just create a theory, he actually activated a time machine. He goes into the past and comes face to face with his younger version. And guess what he does? Without hesitation, Tim kills his own younger self. But here comes the biggest twist. Nothing changes. Causality stays intact. Reality does not break. Tim is still alive. Tim is shocked, and the words that come out of his mouth are, "The F," because this does not fit into any of his scientific understanding. Now, Tim creates theory after theory. First theory, maybe he didn't time travel at all, but reached an identical parallel universe. Second theory, maybe causality is limited by the speed of light. And the third, most dangerous theory, Tim's presence itself has spawned a new universe. Tim repeats his experiment. Again and again, he goes into the past. And every time he kills his younger self. With every jump, his excitement keeps increasing. Almost celebrating, he says, "Now we're getting somewhere." Because according to him, his theory is being proven. The paradox is stable, reality is not breaking. But then the situation gets even worse. Suddenly another Tim appears, and without any warning, he launches a surprise attack on the first Tim. Now the scene becomes completely chaotic. Multiple Tims exist, all staring at each other, all confused about who is the original and who is the mistake. Cut to a bar. Tim is now on a date. This is where Delilah enters, smart, sarcastic, and sharp. Delilah works on James Bunratty's show, and she tells Tim that she has been stuck in the same job for the last 15 years. Tim is sitting in front of her, but his mind is somewhere else, completely distracted. Delilah casually asks, "So, how was your day?" And Tim, without any filter, tells her the complete truth. He says that today he activated a time machine, powered by stolen nuclear materials, and then he repeatedly killed his younger self. Delilah laughs at first and says, "Great bit." She thinks Tim is joking, but as Tim's tone stays serious, Delilah starts to realize this man is not joking. Meanwhile, the camera briefly shows a suspicious man sitting in the corner of the bar, keeping an eye on Tim and quietly reporting something to someone on the phone. Delilah tries to make the conversation normal again and asks, "Do you have any friends?" Tim answers without hesitation, "I don't have friends." In a flashback, he explains that his mother allowed him to do experiments when he was a child. Tim believes that learning to live alone is a reward. Delilah challenges this mindset and says that people usually say this when they think they are better and smarter than others. Tim bluntly accepts it. "I am better and smarter." Tim then explains that time travel will eventually create such a big paradox that reality will literally break. This sounds ominous to Delilah, but she gives an analogy. It is like a woman getting superpowers and worrying about her job, when she should just laser her boss instead. Tim gets excited and says, "Exactly, thank you." But then he gets a shock. He suddenly realizes that he is sitting on a date when he should actually be in the lab. He abruptly stands up and says, "I need to get back to the lab." Delilah's patience breaks. She says that a woman crossing half the city to come to Murderville is a leap of faith, but Tim is already gone, mentally and physically. Delilah explodes in anger, tells every person in the bar, "F you," one by one, and walks out. And Tim, he goes back again. to his lab, his paradox, and his own multiple versions. Chaos, blood, confusion. It is all there. But for Tim, the solution is simple. He tells himself, first rule of science, repeat the experiment, verify the results. And he does the same thing again. The scene shifts, and now there are multiple Tims present in the lab. Dozens of versions. They all look the same, all equally confident, equally arrogant, and now they are all arguing with each other. One Tim angrily asks another, "You break the world for no point but to prove you can do it. What then?" But the data is cold, emotionless. The results are perfectly consistent. More than 30 loops have already happened, and still no perceivable paradox. Reality is still intact. As the confusion increases, the Tims start wearing name tags, so they can tell who is who. The irony is that without labeling himself, Tim can no longer recognize himself. Cut back to the bar. Delilah has come back to get her scarf. The moment she sees Tim, she is shocked. "I thought you had to go back to the lab." Tim is genuinely confused. "Wasn't that yesterday?" Delilah tells him. "All of this happened just 2 hours ago." Tim realizes it and, almost impressed, says, "Wow, I did way too many loops." Delilah sarcastically asks, "Loops? What is that? Some kind of drink?" And then she orders him, "Come buy me one. You owe me." Cut to the lab. Now there are 21 drunk Tims there. One Tim shouts, "Why did you think 21 drunks would be an improvement?" Another Tim proudly announces that he is ordering coffee. God bless capitalism. And then the tone suddenly turns dark. A hitman is targeting Tim. A message comes on the phone. "Mr. Travers, the Kingmaker is a teacher, and today he is teaching you the consequences of stealing from better men." Gunshot. One Tim falls and dies. But the problem is, he was just one Tim. The others are still alive. In the bar, Delilah and Tim are talking. Delilah finally asks, "Why? Mr. Mad Scientist Man? Why?" Tim casually replies, "Isn't curiosity enough?" Delilah disagrees. Curiosity always has an agenda. And then for the first time, Tim is honest. "I want to stand alone with God at the end of time and tell the bastard off." Delilah laughs and says, "God would be a she." Tim shrugs. "Our world is shit. It's definitely a he." In the lab, the Tims are trying to understand the time machine. The machine uses entangled particles. But there is one limitation. The door opens only into the past, not into the future. Delilah brings up the idea of the multiverse. Tim rejects it. The multiverse feels too convenient to him. But Delilah softly says, "I love the multiverse. I love all the different versions of me. It doesn't matter if I mess up, because somewhere they made it. There are some days I really need that." Tim suddenly says a sensitive line. "But if they succeeded, does that make them you? Maybe failing is your defining trait." Delilah is instantly offended. An awkward silence spreads in the air. Tim realizes he has gone too far, so he tries damage control. Would you like to see my lab?" When they reach the lab, Delilah feels the entire setup looks like an elaborate LARP. Laughing, she says, "I never thought I'd be into a LARPer, but your commitment is impressive. I'm into it." Tim takes this as an insult. He sharply says, "My time machine is not a prop." Delilah rolls her eyes. "Talk like a normal person. I bet $5 you just spend too much time talking to yourself." And then Delilah looks to the other side of the time machine, and standing there is her exact duplicate. Both Delilahs freeze when they see each other. Then both of them scream at the same time. Chaos explodes. In panic, Delilah grabs a gun, and without thinking, shoots her duplicate. One body falls. All the Tims are stunned. Delilah runs away. Dead silence. Then one Tim casually asks, "So, how did the date go?" Worst timing imaginable. One Tim points out, "She literally committed murder." That was her go-to response. Another Tim adds, "She did mention something about crushing peasants." And then one Tim realizes, "You thought she would fix you." The lab instantly turns into a civil war. All the Tims start arguing with each other, blaming each other, punching each other. One Tim shouts, "Tim Travers, go F yourself." And the irony is that literally all the Tims collapse into that chaos. Identity has completely dissolved. Cut to the news. A breaking report comes in. 30 parishioners have mysteriously disappeared from a church in Mississippi. Experts are linking it to wormhole displacement theory. In the lab, the Tims understand the truth. Every time a new Tim is created, matter is being pulled from somewhere else. Reality is staying balanced. The price is being paid somewhere else. One Tim announces, "Tao Tim was murdered." On a coffee run, a decision is made. From now on, there will be a buddy system. No Tim will go alone. All the Tims protest. In one corner of the lab, two Tims quietly discuss philosophy. One says, "The multiverse isn't different versions of our lives. It's different sets of laws. It's just the newest way to put ourselves at the center, to convince ourselves that we matter." The other Tim calmly asks, why is not mattering so bad? Why is it so terrifying to not be the most important person? The first Tim calmly replies, it's freeing. My mistakes are mine, and mine alone. On the other side, the Kingmaker, the dangerous criminal from whom Tim stole plutonium, calls his hitman Helter. The Kingmaker is furious because Tim is still not dead. He threatens that if Helter fails, he will send another assassin, Royce. Cut to the radio show. James Bunratty asks Tim, why are you really here? And for the first time, Tim is completely honest. He says, if something goes wrong when I turn on the machine, a record would be a pretty good thing to have. James replies without hesitation, with full love and respect, I hope you die a very painful death. In the lab, the Tims power up the time machine. Just then, Hitman Helter arrives there. He is completely confused, and because he has already killed Tim many times before, he asks Tim, are you a god? Tim smirks. No, not a god. Not yet. Tim gives a speech. Mom always used to say, you're not a great person, Tim. Hell, you're not even a very good person. But what you are is a great scientist. Mortal laws no longer apply to us. The door is opened, and what appears is unimaginable. The universe is gone. Only an endless black void remains. One Tim whispers, holy F, we blew up the universe. Panic spreads. One Tim is hanging on the edge, asking for help. Another Tim, instead of helping, starts philosophizing. If the universe is gone, its laws should be gone too. Gravity still exists. Where is that coming from? Suddenly, one Tim pushes the hanging Tim into the void. He was creeping everybody out. Tim finally connects the dots. The paradox has created a black hole, which has destroyed Earth. Zeta Tim falls into the void. According to the theory, he will keep falling forever. He will not age, and he will not die. Just then, Royce arrives in the lab with his armed team. He shoots one Tim. Tim asks, this about the plutonium? Royce confirms it. And then, something impossible happens. A mysterious figure appears, claiming that he is God. One Tim instantly says, if God actually exists, I'm out. Royce attacks God, but God kills one Tim right there. Telepathically, Tim suddenly understands everything. The God standing in front of him is no one else. It is Zeta Tim, the same Tim who fell into the black void. Zeta Tim starts speaking, and there is no anger in his voice, no pain, only exhaustion. Do you know what it's like to fall forever? Unable to starve? Unable to die? You go mad. And when madness runs out, you start creating new realities in your mind. He explains how he refined every imagined world, perfected it, so flawless that the difference between simulation and physical reality became just semantics. And then he laughs and says, that's how you achieve godhood, bitches. The truth is, the entire universe is a simulated reality running inside Zeta Tim's mind. Cut to the bar. Delilah tells James Bunratty her entire adventure. The time machine, the duplicates, the gunshot, the chaos, everything. James is stunned. In the lab, one Tim is talking to Royce. Royce is calm now. He says he will not kill Tim anymore. The other, you killed my men with his mind. Royce prepares to leave and casually says, I'm gonna call my grandkids and tell them I love them. Tim is shocked. You're married? With grandkids? You're a professional murderer. Royce shrugs. My wife thinks it's hot. Tim bitterly says, some people are just meant for love. Some aren't. Royce immediately cuts him off. Bullshit. Abusers, rapists, murderers, politicians, pricks on YouTube. Most of them still find someone to love them. Your problem is you don't know how to love yourself. Then he gives Tim advice. Find the angriest, ugliest part of you and show that son of a bitch they're beautiful. That line hits Tim somewhere deep inside. He decides there will be no more running. It's time to meet my maker. Tim calls Delilah and sincerely apologizes. Delilah is surprisingly calm. It was messed up, but there's a middle ground between hate and love. That's us, the middle people. And she softly adds, maybe try being nicer to yourself. Literally, Tim reaches Zeta Tim, who is slowly destroying the universe. Zeta Tim says, they left me in a black hole, alone, literally forever. Tim quietly replies, that wasn't cool. I wasn't part of that. Zeta Tim stops. Guess that makes you the best of us. Tim steps forward and says, then let's find out, together? Tim and Zeta. Tim finally reach the center of the universe. There they meet the actual God, who casually introduces himself as the simulator of your universe. Tim asks a direct question, is there a meaning of life? God replies without emotion, yes, but it has nothing to do with humans. This simulation exists to maximize a specific numerical output. Humanity is just a randomly generated background element. Hearing this, Tim snaps. We broke your simulation. Tim Travers is the most important person in the entire universe. Ever! God gets irritated. Great, now I'll have to reset this universe. Tim immediately pushes back. Reset? What does that even mean? Do you exist outside this universe? God hesitates, then tells the truth. He is not a divine being. He is a storyteller. For spiritual growth and compensation, Tim asks, confused. Like a novelist? God awkwardly adds. Yes, but with a publisher. Pause. Self-publishing. Now both Tim and Zeta Tim go into full roast mode. Wait, so you're an unpublished novelist simulating a universe? This isn't godhood. This is you chasing a high score in a management game. You didn't even make it, did you? A better God did. We're literally a retail product for a bored, failed writer. God completely loses it and tries to delete the universe. But Zeta Tim calmly gains system access and boots God out. Guys like him can't code for shit. Now control is in Zeta Tim's hands. He thinks about what he will do with the new universe and coldly says, a universe of me and only me. Tim opposes him. Then we'll never know if we're wrong. Worst people still find love. I know we can too, Zeta Tim asks. How do you know? Tim softly replies, because I did. It wasn't long, but for a second I knew what it felt like coming up for air after holding your breath forever. Zeta Tim pauses for a moment, then he slowly says, some people are better alone, deserve to be alone, people like me. And right here, Tim does something no one expects. He steps forward and says, I love you, Tim Travers, and I don't want you to be alone, but that's up to you, buddy. The moment he hears this, Zeta Tim breaks down. For the first time, someone has not come to fix him, not to change him, just to accept him. Zeta Tim decides to make a new beginning. Just take 1 point of infinite energy, add will, time, and that should make one big bang. Cut. Tim finds himself near the time machine at the exact moment where everything started. He mutters to himself, what am I doing? I've got a date tonight. Tim, what were you thinking? He starts to leave the lab, then stops. But on the other hand, a voice comes from behind. Dumb! Tim turns around in shock. And friends, this is where this incredible journey ends. Now the question is, what do we learn from this movie? Maybe this: we all feel alone, no matter how many versions of ourselves exist. Self-love is not a motivational quote. It begins when you stop running away from your worst, most shameful, most damaged version. Maybe the universe has no grand meaning. Maybe we really are randomly generated background elements in the management game of a bored, failed writer. But that does not mean our feelings are fake, our connections are meaningless, or our moments are worthless. Throughout the movie, Tim keeps running from himself, keeps killing himself, keeps trying to prove himself. And in the end, he understands this. The real paradox was not time travel. The real paradox was trying to escape yourself while hating yourself. When Tim said, I love you to Zeta Tim, that is when the universe changed. A professional killer like Royce could still find love and family. A cynical girl like Delilah could find a middle ground between hate and love. So why not Tim Travers? And the most ironic thing, God himself turned out to be a failed writer. But if even God can be imperfect, then maybe our imperfection is not a failure. Think about it, friends. And if this story touched you even a little, then maybe you also accepted one of your versions, just a little.